Welcome to the third in a series sponsored by the Battle of Homestead Foundation, Monday Markers with Charlie. This third session will be about the cotton mill strikers of 1845 and 1848. At the last two marker programs, we talked about two of the greatest individuals in Pittsburgh labor history, Martin Delaney and Crystal Eastman. And now we're going to talk about some of the most important social upheavals, collective actions for justice and a better world by Pittsburgh workers. The textile industry in Pittsburgh started in the early 19th century and was fed by the need for shippers who were sending heavy metal and manufactured goods and glass downriver, the need to have a lighter, bulky products being brought upriver from the agricultural south. So cotton and tobacco began to be imported in large amounts into Pittsburgh, and they fostered two industries, the textile industry and then the stogie industry that made working class cigars, and we'll talk about that later. By the 1840s, there were seven sizable factories in Allegheny City, or what is today the North Side, about 1,500 workers. And hundreds of them were very young girls, or even some young boys. This was a very different. This was the first real industrial mass production industry, textiles, and it was an industry that required a lot of capitalization and relatively low skills, repetitive work. And for this, women were thought to be particularly endowed with the patience and the dexterity to do this work. They also were paid much less than men. The average male wage in the 19th century generally tended to be $1 a day. Women in the textile mills of Allegheny City made $250 a week for a 72-hour week. And they were very militantly demanding a 60-hour week, 10 hours a day for 6 days. In 1843, the workers marched and demanded, sort of like the Fight for 15. They demanded what men were demanding, that is $2 a day and roast beef. This would have been a huge jump from $250 a week for sure. But in 1845, the textile women struck the seven factories for the 10-hour day and the 60-hour week, and a restriction in child labor because there were children working in the factories under 10 years, as young as 7 and 8 years old. The strike was marked by strident militancy and the forcible entry into several of the factories to eject strikebreakers. A lot of this was the beginning, really, of the potato famine. Irish coming to America. There were certainly beginning to be large numbers of extremely poor, desperate, mostly Catholic women workers who were eager to get any kind of employment. So there were certainly people there willing to scab, and the influx of Catholics at this time and in conflict with the existing workforce was one of the factors that drove the creation of the Know Nothing Party and the election as mayor of Joe Barker, who was a virulent anti-Catholic. But at any rate, while the strikes immediately failed, the agitation that was created caused the state legislature to pass a law saying that textile mills could only employ the workers on a 10-hour day. So they won politically what they had not been able to win directly from very militant tactics. And this gave great hope. It gave the workers a 10-hour day. And then in 1848, the owners decided to attack. And what they did is there was a loophole in the law that allowed workers to waive their 10-hour rights and sign an agreement to waive these rights, a personal agreement. It would also allow parents to waive the rights of children which had under the law had been denied, that was illegal to hire children under 12 years old. This allowed parents to sign a waiver for that also. They, in July of 1848, the workers were locked out, and it was made a condition of return that they sign the waiver of their 10-hour rights. This provoked very militant and at times violent entries into some of the factories and the ejection of the women who were working in these factories. And it also led eventually to the arrest of quite a number of both women who were militant on the picket lines and in the entries to the factories, but also to the men who stood at some distance but prevented deputies and the forces of law from interfering with the women when they entered into the factories. The women showed a great deal of independence and skill in negotiations. They had been led in 1848 by a stunningly beautiful woman from Kentucky who people called the Unknown. She was a very good negotiator, and the women trusted her. And so in negotiations, while various men tried to take the negotiations over, the women always looked to this unknown to see whether she felt that they were doing the right thing. The rioters were prosecuted by a team that was led by Edwin Stanton, who became the Secretary of Labor or Secretary of War under Abraham Lincoln. And the judge was very biased against the women, and he angrily condemned them, stating, "Females should be peaceful and law-abiding, and when they engage in mob violence against their own sex, they lose all title to consideration or pity. They enjoy our respect as long as their conduct is consistent with the delicacy and modesty of the female character." So in this centennial year of women gaining the right to vote, it is important to remember the pivotal role that women have played in the struggle for justice and the expansion of human and labor rights. The cotton mill strikers were pioneers in the fight against child labor and the fight for a fair day's wage for a fair day's work. Their leader, the Unknown, symbolizes in a very powerful way the labor and the courage of all those who work for the common good without ego or without selfishness. We will continue this series in the coming weeks and deal with some of the most important uprisings of a collective nature, like the blocking of the cannon and the 1877 railroad strike.
Sometimes I work harder than I have to, just to prove I can do this job. Sometimes I feel so separated when no one will back me up. anybody say about me. I don't really care if they look my way. We're the riot girls of 1848, and I want it now, my equal pay. Breaking down the doors, I found out the hard way.